Leading up to Canadian Independent Bookstore Day on Saturday, August 29th, Penguin Random House Canada is spotlighting a Canadian independent bookstore every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us on Twitter at PenguinRandomCA and follow the hashtag Indie Feature Friday. Today, the hashtag Indie Feature Friday spotlight is on Glass Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Edmonton, Alberta that focuses on Canadian writing with special attention paid to LGBTQ2SIA and IBPOC writers, as well as the independent publishers who help produce their work. My name is Vivek Shraya. I'm an artist and writer and Jason Purcell's best friend. And today I'm delighted to be in conversation with said best friend and co-founder and co-owner of Glass Bookshop. Jason, hello.
Hello, Vivek. Thank you so much. So nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Should we dig right in?
Shall we?
So one of the things I know you've been asked this a lot, I'm sure, but I am very curious about like the origin story of the bookstore, but more so I'm interested in the origin story of you and Matthew. I feel like, you know, having being a co-owner with a bookstore co-owner is like a lesbian dream come true. And I really want to know the lesbian love story behind Glass Bookshop.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that there is definitely a love story aspect, and it's something that I really want us to work out in couples therapy. I've been suggesting it every day. And Matthew's the reticent one. He doesn't want to talk about our history, but we met.
You can tell me. Let's pretend I'm your therapist.
I always do. I always do. So Matthew and I met probably 8 years ago now, and I was just kind of wrapping up my undergrad. He'd already kind of finished, but we met at a magazine conference that Hannah McGregor was organizing. Hannah McGregor, amazing scholar and host of Secret Feminist Agenda, that great podcast.
Yeah, I know Hannah McGregor. Every time I hear that name, I think of that like song Hannah Montana, but I like in my mind it's like Hannah McGregor, Hannah McGregor, Hannah McGregor.
She needs to rebrand the whole podcast to include that.
Sorry, I interrupted. This is going to happen a lot.
This is what I want. So we met, and like, I mean, I'll say it here. It's just you and me. He did definitely have some romantic ambitions, but just never came to be. No. I said, I am not ready for love right now, Matthew, but I am ready for a lifelong friendship.
A bookstore.
A bookstore. We'll blend these boundaries so that it almost feels like a marriage. So we met, and we kind of had this friendship that was collaborative in a lot of ways. He edits a magazine called Glass Buffalo, and I came on as the interviews editor. And so we did kind of have this working relationship, and that's when I sort of had a sense that something more could work. And so it was probably March of 2018. We were sitting down for coffee, and I had just finished grad school. I was working at the Canadian Literature Center at the University of Alberta, but I sort of reached like the limit. I couldn't go any farther there. You know, I couldn't like ascend to directorship. And Matthew had left his job in magazine publishing. He was freelance.
I love how you just dropped that in. I could not ascend to directorship.
Well, that's because I've said, why can't I ascend to directorship in so many meetings?
Right.
They won't let me have that kind of power. So I made the power for myself. But we just wanted to find a way to make a living with books, make a life with books in a way that like didn't mean continuing on in academia for me. Or, you know, kind of working this sort of thankless publishing job that Matthew had. You know, it's not always easy, I think, in a place like Edmonton.
I have no idea what you mean right now.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have any sort of reference point for any of.
Well, I find this really fascinating because like, it's like you went to grad school. And most people go to grad school and are like, oh my God, I need to get a job like right now. And you're like, how about I start a bookstore, one of the most lucrative businesses, you know, known.
Like one of the most, like, you know, you think academia is like precarious, and then I step away from that and go to like, opening a bookstore. And we had so many responses of people saying like, what are you doing? Like, you can't open a bookstore in 2020. But
and now you're like,
I am. Oh yeah. I have so much like shade for those people now because it's totally feasible. And like, I think one interesting thing that I've noticed is that Canada in particular, I'm not so well acquainted with what's going on in the States right now, but Canada has this amazing network of independent bookstores, just like incredible. Like Massey Books, I'm thinking of, Patricia Massey reached out and gave so much personal help to me and Matthew when we were starting this up. Like we were on a call just like this, and she was giving us all this advice. Like, I mean, it's something that's really sustainable. It's something that you can actually make a go of these days. And you know Edmonton, maybe some of the folks who are watching this right now don't really have a sense of Edmonton, but it's got like a population, if you're including some of the neighboring communities,
200 people. 200.
Like 200 people. And, you know, they can't all fit in the chapters. So where are they going to go? So here we are.
Glass Bookshop.
Glass Bookshop, just down the street.
Okay, so one of the things I'm very curious about is like, you know, are one of you like good cop versus bad cop? Like when it comes to like, you know, consumers who have questions or events you were thinking of doing back when there was such a thing as events. Yeah, very curious about like a bad cop, good cop dynamic, who it is.
What do you think? What do you think?
I think on the surface, you are the good cop, but you are actually the bad cop on the inside. And I think
you know me so well. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And that's exactly why I knew Matthew was the right person to start this with. He's my foil in so many ways.
And I also am curious if you feel inclined to share what you feel like your central conflict is about.
Okay. So I'm very up here, right? So like I'm very conceptual. I think I'm thinking about the vision of the shop. I'm thinking of like what we could be. And then Matthew is like really on the ground, which we need. He's like right at those, like the minutia, the really the details that need the attention. He's great. And we could never swap roles. It would just be disastrous, I think. So I think our main point of conflict is finding that point of communication in the middle where I say, Matthew, what do you think of this? And he doesn't hear me saying, why aren't you doing it like this right now, the way that I asked you to do it?
Except you actually are saying, why aren't you doing this?
Well, I mean, I am, but I'm asking him to see the subtext and not the text.
Okay, and then thank you for your candor. And so then you settled on the name Glass Bookshop, and I'm curious if there were other contenders, like if there were, like, what were the other like top two contenders, or what was the suggestion that was made that you were like, oh hell no, like I am never going to call my bookstore Caterpillar Bookstore?
Oh God. Oh my God, even the notion. Well, I'm talking to the queen of branding herself, and it was really only ever Glass Bookshop. There were no other contenders because of Glass Buffalo, the magazine. Matthew has done such a wonderful job in Edmonton.
Branding.
Yeah, he has
brand consistency. I get this.
People trust him. People trust the work he's done over the years. They know that he's reliable, that he can actually keep an artistic project going long term. He's been very caring toward the writers he's published, mentoring younger writers or mentoring people in publishing. So there's this kind of feeling locally that I wanted to make sure we were kind of tapping into, so people would trust the bookshop just as much as they do the magazine and what Matthew's worked really hard to do in the community.
Wow. Okay. So one name to rule them all.
That's the idea.
Okay, and so you, for those of you that are watching right now, Jason Purcell is also a writer with like one or two chapbooks published.
One chapbook published.
One, and maybe another one on the way.
God knows, you know, I'm hoping.
Well, so Jason Purcell is a writer, and I would love to know about your relationship and, like, I guess once again the tension. As a potentially a theme for today's talk conversation of just like what it means to be a writer and a bookseller, and also curious if being a bookseller has impacted your writing in any way.
Oh, interesting. I kind of feel like I was a bookseller before I took myself seriously as a writer. I worked at a big box book retailer. I've forgotten the name. But I worked at that place, wherever it is, from high school into early university. And that's kind of where I was brought up as a bookseller and where I learned some of the standard practices of bookselling in Canada, all this stuff. And then I think that is what led me to feel more confident in my writing, because I was reading so much and being exposed to what was going on here. What I will say is that like being a bookseller has impacted my writing insofar as I don't do very much of it anymore because the bookshop demands so much, especially right now in this new this way of arranging the bookshop in a new way. But I also think that being a writer has helped the bookshop tremendously, because Matthew's a writer as well, are both kind of enmeshed in this amazing community already that, so I think maybe we see things from a different perspective. We maybe have a more personal relationship with some of the amazing writers whose books are coming out, whose books we're promoting. And I think we kind of have a sense of how we would want our books to be treated and how we would want our books to be introduced to other people. And so that's been something that I think is really unique. I know there are a lot of bookstores that are run by writers. There's Books Are Magic in Brooklyn, Emma Straub's bookstore. And yeah, I just think that it adds an interesting texture. And to go back to like this conversation about like trust and care, I think that us being writers and building these relationships and these friendships with people across the country, not just in Edmonton, has sort of expanded what it is that we imagine our bookshop to do, what we imagine our work to be. So it's I think really it works hand in hand. Just one hand is being fed more than the other hand.
Do you ever like use your writer status to convince a consumer? Like, are you ever like, listen, as a writer, the prose in this novel is just like, do you ever, yeah, exactly. Chef's
all the
kiss.
time with the subtweet, with I'm Afraid of Men, with She of the Mountains.
Stop.
But all the time. And I try not to do it in a way that's like, listen, I know. You may not know, but I know. Like, that's not the attitude that I want to convey.
Okay.
But I do say things like, I really admire the way that this person has written this book because it's something I aspire to in my own writing. And then that's a way that I kind of say like, hey, check it out. I take this very seriously. I'm not just trying to like make a buck. I do that all the time with like Zoe Lee Peterson's Next Year for Sure, which I just think is like the perfect first novel. I don't know how it happened that way, but it's phenomenal.
What a good book.
Yeah. But I that's the kind of way that I try to let people know that I'm more than just a bookseller.
It's a really interesting device because it's kind of like, listen, I'm a little bit like you, but I'm also a little like them, you know, like it's very clever.
Interesting middle ground.
So you were located in a mall in prior to COVID. And, you know, as a fellow Edmontonian or once Edmontonian, I really understand mall culture and the sort of interesting traffic that happens in a mall. And I'm quite curious, what was the strangest request that you got in a mall, aside from like a washroom I can use?
Oh my God, Vivek. I wish that I had like written some of the encounters down so that I could have told you. This isn't a strange request, but maybe this is like something that happened in the first few days that actually gave me a lot of hope, because I felt really unsure about what it would be like to open an independent bookstore in a mall.
Oh no, is this a mom story? I feel like a mom story is coming on, and I like.
What is a mom story?
Well, like a mom came in and she said to me, all my life I've been wandering the streets of this mall, hoping that an independent bookstore would open, and now I can finally. No?
Oh no, that didn't happen. Okay. Maybe to Matthew. We should have got him on the call.
Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh, but mine was
like, this is just.
Well, it's not comfortable, you know. We make a point of stocking the shop with the writers who we love and admire and who are kind of part of these different communities that maybe we're not part of ourselves, but we're kind of working to uplift in some way. And so that, to me, who had worked at that big box retailer, name escapes me, I picked up a kind of sense of what bookselling was to look like. So we brought in a whole bunch of like Dion Brand, for example, who's not by any means like an esoteric writer or like flying under the radar, like just big name, like one of Canada's best writers. And but definitely has some books in her body of work that are less accessible than others.
Sure.
So we had brought in some that were on that side of the spectrum, where, you know, not quite as like everyday your novel type. It was like it's a really interesting volume about diaspora writing. And anyway, somebody came up and was paying for it on the second or third day, and I was like, oh, you must be a big fan of Dion Brand to pick this one up. And they're like, no, I've never heard of this writer before. I have never
Canceled,
like,
unfriended, deleted.
But it gave me so much hope, because I really wasn't sure that people would walk into a bookstore in a mall and give something like that a shot. That's something that's not like a Stephen King or a Margaret Atwood or something that like would be stocked in an airport bookstore, for example. Like they're taking risks. And that was really heartening for me to see. I don't know.
You're trying to make me cry here. I wanted something like,
I know.
I mean, that's a great story, but like I was really looking for like, you know, somebody who like came in with nail clippers and just started like cutting their nails in your story.
No. One thing that was cool though, so for all of you folks who aren't from Edmonton, the mall we were in, City Center Mall, is connected by all these like underground pedways that lead to other parts of downtown, because it can get kind of cold here. And one of those pedways leads to the Citadel Theater, where sometimes Broadway shows are kind of tested out because we're so far from New York.
Is this a celebrity story?
It's kind of a celebrity story. And you're going to like it, because actually the book that this person chose. So they test out Broadway plays because we're so far from New York that like reporters can't like sneak up and get a pre-review or whatever. So it was 9 that they were previewing here, which I think had already opened in New York before COVID, or maybe was planning to. But it's a really amazing musical. And it's like the actual stars who were here. It's not just like we get some fill-ins and then the regular people, the real stars show up in New York. But it's like, yeah, it was cool. So one day this woman walks in and she looks amazing. She's like glammed up. And I was like, I really appreciate this. Thank you. It's kind of browsing around for a while, and she grabs a book, and it was Shut Up, You're Pretty.
Oh,
and, yeah. And she's like, can I sit down? We had some chairs. Can I sit down and just hang out here for a while? And I was like, yeah, you bet. Like, I'll get you some water, have a seat. Starts reading the book. She's there for maybe half an hour. She comes, she buys it. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. Like, great choice. Talked a bit about Taya, talked a bit about you. And it's amazing. I'd never heard of anything like that happening in the States. It's like, oh, you're from the States. Yeah, I'm just here for work. Oh, and very humble. What do you do? Oh, I'm just in a show. Like, she's the lead in this musical that is now like on Broadway, like killing it. Just so like humble and cool, and chose and actually bought Taya's book. So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that one sale is really special.
Well, I mean, I want to go back to your last story, and I think it's so wonderful that you're stocking Dion's work, but also like back catalog, right? Because I feel like that's the stuff that like even fans don't necessarily always even know of, or can't always find. So yeah, I think that's wonderful. So I'm really heartened to hear that the store, from our conversations, is doing very well during the pandemic. And I'm really curious. A lot of bookstore owners have talked about, or booksellers have talked about, you know, the influx of purchases of books by Black authors, but I'm curious, like, what other kinds of trends, particularly, let's say, like month 1, month 2 of the pandemic, like what kind of like, pandemic trends you saw in the bookstore?
Okay, pandemic trends. I mean, definitely tons of books about sourdough, which should surprise no one. Everyone was buying. Oh yeah, like
it's real.
It's real, yeah, and so that was probably one of the most kind of surprising titles that would come through, or these books about sourdough. And then there was a lot of
like, is there that many books about sourdough?
Oh my God, you would never believe how many there are. It was, I didn't even know how these people were finding them. I think you missed a moment.
Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. You have to think about something else. A lot of people were reading apocalyptic novels, or novels about, like, people I think really wanted to maybe see an example of how to think through this thing that we're living in now, that maybe had never been even a possibility in their mind. It made me
It's kind
think
of
a
like
lot
how
about
Contagion was like the #1 film on Netflix, like during month one for the longest time.
right.
And some people were like, why would you watch that? And others were like, why wouldn't you watch this? So yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
it's
you were
like
saying it makes
strategy.
me, yeah, exactly.
Well, it makes me think of the writing that was published. I think you and I have talked a bit about this privately, but the stuff that came after the Spanish flu, what was published after the Spanish flu. And um, I think that it shouldn't have surprised me that that's what people wanted to read in this moment. Like, it shouldn't have surprised me that people would actually turn to stories, fiction or nonfiction, about previous pandemics or imagined catastrophes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So not surprising, really.
That makes sense. It's interesting that like both, like, again, TV shows, like in the interest in the kinds of TV shows correlate to books as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is like a pretty broad question, but as a bookseller, I'm kind of curious, like, what kinds of gaps do you see in CanLit and books in general? And I mean, maybe this is from your experience from consumers who are coming in, or like, I'm looking for a book about this, or by, this kind of person. But yeah, I'm just sort of curious in your time as a bookseller, what do you feel are like still some gaps in CanLit?
I think some gaps in CanLit happen along language lines and translation lines.
Ooh.
We are slowly trying to like find, and more books are being published in a lot of like languages of like this place. So a lot in Cree or in Anishinaabe or whatever. And so we're trying to like find those and bring them in, because there is a real urgency, I think, among folks to learn languages of the places that they live, especially if you're an Indigenous person on this land, Treaty 6, and reacquainting yourself with a language that had been like violently ripped from you. So I think that that's like the just the kind of blanketing Anglocentrism of publishing, and it's difficult. I imagine it's difficult because of the market. Like, you're not going to sell tons of books in languages other than English in Alberta, sometimes French. But like, why is that? Well, of course, because of the ongoing like effects of colonialism. Totally. So anyway, these are things that I'm kind of noticing, because they're becoming more and more available, and we want to be a home for those books. So it's something that I hope more publishers will kind of take risks on, even if it's not like, if it's like dual language or trilingual. I think that's something that there's room for and that people are asking for.
That's incredible. Yeah, I was very curious what your answer was going to be. I mean, there was a part of me that did hope that your answer was going to be that like a major gap in CanLit is my cookbook on sourdough. But yeah, you already told me I missed that moment, so I'm just going to take this time to process a little bit. Or
sorry. It's just a tough love. Yeah. I want you to focus your attention.
Bad cop, clearly.
Bad cop, you see?
Yeah, there it is.
Didn't mince words.
Okay, we're going to move to audience questions in a second here. Okay. But lastly, I'd love to ask you, I mean, I just want to say personally that I love the work that you're doing in Edmonton. Just knowing that a bookstore like yours exists, just like really warms my heart. And yeah, I'm just so pleased and thrilled that Glass Bookshop exists. It also makes me feel, I mean, I tend to veer on the more pessimistic side of things, but Glass Bookshop's one of those examples where I'm like, things maybe are a little bit better than in Edmonton than when I grew up. And so anyways, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And I guess I'm curious what moving forward are some of your goals and hopes for the future of the bookstore, aside from, one day people being able to actually come to the bookstore. Any other goals?
Yeah. Well, thank you, first of all, for saying that, because that means so much. And you've supported us in so many ways. And I'm just so grateful. But to answer your question, there are a lot of things. Like, I have a lot of ambitions for the shop, and one of those things would be to start publishing books of our own, and bringing on a team of editors who could do that kind of acquisition work and editorial work, and Matthew and me just kind of being the economic frame for that.
That's awesome. That's incredible.
And we want to do some like writer in residences through the shop one day, hopefully, and fund like mentorship program. Like we kind of want to make sure that the space really does work in many dimensions, and it's not just a place for commerce and book buying, and God knows what gathering will look like in the future. But I want there to be ways that we're kind of contributing actively to the flourishing of writing in Edmonton and in Canada more broadly.
Well, I hope that, I mean, all of those things sound incredible, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of those initiatives and dreams realized. And if there's anything I can do to support you, you know where to WhatsApp me.
Oh, I've got something in mind for you.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah,
wow,
okay. I'll tell you later. Yeah.
Okay, I see. Okay. First audience question. Earlier in the conversation, Jason, that is you, said sometimes you need to take and make power for yourself. What advice would each of you give to someone who wants to build a career in in the arts, especially in Canada? Why don't you go first?
Okay. That joke definitely has some weight to it. And I think one of the realities for like that made Glass Bookshop possible is that Matthew and I are both university educated, white, cis men. And so that the barriers to opening a bookshop, we recognize from the get, were going to be so much less than, or far fewer boundaries, than for folks who embody other identities. And like I said, kind of with like the publishing aspect of the bookshop that we are kind of gearing toward or hoping for, we imagine the bookshop being a place that like we put ourselves and our financial lives kind of at risk to build the thing, because we have a lot of that kind of power already, just socially and economically and politically, and then build it so that other folks can benefit from it. So what advice would I give to somebody who wants to make a career for themselves? I mean, you're a great example of someone who did that too, who like refused a lot of the systemic boundaries that were placed in front of you, and created like incredible art that people like really literally couldn't help but support, right? Like you have a really amazing story. Maybe you want to share some of your story and maybe your advice.
Yeah, I love that your moderator skills are starting to kick in. Don't try to top me, Jason Purcell.
I would never. That's what Adam's for.
I'm the Zoom top here. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I would recommend actually is thinking about how to get your work out there outside of traditional formats. For me, you know, one of the things that I did at the beginning of my career, my writing career 10 years ago, and then also as a musician, was I put out work independently. So whether that was self-publishing, whether that was recording my own albums, whether that was streaming music on MySpace, just really aging myself right now. But, you know, just looking for platforms and opportunities to put your work out there. Because I think one of the things that I had to really understand and learn is that no matter how much I wanted and craved institutional support and legitimacy, had I sat around waiting for it, I probably wouldn't be an artist today. So I think, you know, don't wait for an institution to value you and support you. I think find ways to just develop your craft, write regularly. So many young people I meet are like, how do you publish a book? And I'm like, well, do you have a manuscript? And so many of them are like, and I'm like, well, first you write the book. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, you know, really, really try and focus on your craft. And I think the other thing that I would recommend if you were just starting out is try to, I feel really fortunate that I grew up as an artist without, I mean, certainly LiveJournal was around and MySpace was around, but, you know, the sort of intensity of social media did not exist, and the pressure to be on socials did not exist. And so I didn't enter the industry tied to numerics. I wasn't constantly having to measure how many likes the post about my book was getting next to how many likes the person that I was following was getting. And so, you know, just really trying to, you know, I think it's so important to be on social media because it is a free platform to market your work. But I think it's also about creating a balance with the platforms and making sure that you're not getting too sucked into the metrics of it all and the mind fuckery of it all. I'm constantly having to remind myself that, like, you know, for every one person that maybe likes a post about a book, there's a lot of people at home right now that are reading your writing, reading your work, that you actually have no idea, because there's no, like, we don't have like, but I mean, thank God. I really hope you don't develop a book, Jason, that comes with a like button. But, you know, right now when people are reading books, there's no way to quantify that. So anyways, that's a lot of advice. Sorry that took so long. I'll move to the next question. Cutesy question for both. What is your favorite bookstore or library from a film or TV show?
Oh, heavens. God.
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
I am so obsessed with the feminist bookstore in Portlandia. Like, those skits just like really crack me up. And in my mind, like, I feel like you and Matthew are like you have like a bit of like a TV show happening that needs to be filmed. So
We're working on that too, you know.
Great.
Yeah, so stay tuned.
Okay.
Matthew's not as funny though.
Poor Matthew, he's gonna watch this.
He's not even here. Oh my God. Okay, my favorite.
You know what, I find your press photos together so entertaining, because like you are always like, you know, like with your Lana Del Rey cover, eyebrow just like, you know, smize central. But then Matthew kind of is doing it too. Like, I feel like, I don't know if you've like been teaching Matthew some of your like smize techniques, but I feel like lately in the photos he's a lot more like, you know,
good. I love
serious. And I'm like, look at these two. Like they really like, they're not messing around over there.
No, it's full fashion over here. Yeah.
Sorry, your favorite bookstore from a TV or film, from a TV, from a singular TV.
Okay, so it's like somewhat a bookstore. Did you ever watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer? I know Michelle did. Michelle's my Buffy go-to.
This show, I think I've heard of it.
Yay. So Giles, Buffy's watcher, buys a magic shop, and it's pretty cute. It's kind of what my vision for the bookshop really is, where people just gather and then figure out how to stop evil. Like, it's a metaphor, Vivek. Okay, like,
trigger warning. You said the word gather. I'm just like, I'm seeing droplets. Like,
oh yeah,
everywhere droplets.
God, you know, I watched a woman exhale while smoking today, and it was just like a visualization of how far all that goes. It was, yeah.
Yep. Okay, maybe pleasant note. Maybe we'll do one more question.
Okay.
God, these are really good questions. If you could have a physically distant dinner, oh God, on the topic of exhalation, if you could have a physically distant dinner with any three authors, who would they be?
Vivek Shraya.
Oh, come on. We could, yeah.
For real. For real.
Okay.
I would love to have Esther Perel there. Do you know Esther Perel's work?
I don't.
I'm going to send you some videos. Esther Perel, amazing psychotherapist and like couples counselor, who just does the most kind of, to me, incredible work. Has like helped me in all my relationships.
So you and Matthew like read these books to each other, like this person's books to each other in this story.
I wish he would read the things that I tell him to read. I wish. I think our relationship would be so much smoother if he would just like listen to me. The third author who I would want, I think Dionne Brand. She was here for a CLC Kreisel lecture 2 years ago. And before the lecture, you know, we always go out for dinner with the lecturer, and just the funniest, kindest, like most interesting person. And I didn't hear enough stories that night. So I think Dionne, you, and Esther Perel. And then Matthew, so that Esther can kind of give him a talking to while we're all having a good time.
That's a good group. I mean, for me, the two people that I credit as being super influential in terms of like my own writing practice and like starting my path as a writer are both RIP now. Toni Morrison, who wrote The Bluest Eye, and Leslie Feinberg, who wrote Stone Butch Blues. Mm-hmm. They would sort of be at the top of my list of dinners, although I wish it wasn't physically distant. I wish it was just regular old 2019 dinners.
But they're already dead, so there's no risk for them or you. I don't
exactly.
think they can.
Exactly. So,
Closest you like at this dinner.
okay, well, Jason, thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for Indie Feature Friday. For anyone that joined us a bit late, with us today was Jason Purcell, co-founder and co-owner of Glass Bookshop, an independent bookstore in Edmonton, Alberta that I love, that focuses on Canadian writing with special attention paid to LGBTQ2SIA and IBPOC writers, as well as the independent publishers who produce their work. Penguin Random House Canada will continue to spotlight a Canadian independent bookstore every Friday. I won't be allowed to moderate these conversations anymore. I think I'm getting fired after this is done. But you should tune in every Friday leading up to Canadian Independent Bookstore at the end of August. So be sure to follow @PenguinRandomCA on Twitter and the hashtag Indie Feature Friday for upcoming events. See you next week. Well, not me again, but until then, take care.